Why does the Bible use all of this imagery related to substitution, to sacrifice, and to blood? Today, I want to talk to you from a biblical perspective and to begin to introduce this idea or have a better understanding of this idea of the sacrifice of blood and substitutionary sacrifice. This is something that you're going to find a lot in the Bible, and it's a recurring theme. But if you're unfamiliar with the way that these systems work, then it's going to be difficult to understand it in a modern day context because we just don't have this kind of context like that anymore. And so we do, but not in this way. So today, I want to present why the blood substitution, why the use of sacrifice, why do we find that recurring theme and imagery in the Bible? And this is by no means going to be exhaustive. This is meant to be a short devotional, but I do want to at least lay the foundation, the groundwork to begin to understand it in the future as we build on it in videos to come. So you're going to find that over and over the Bible mentions this use of blood and the use of sacrifices when it's talking about salvation. And part of that has to do with the legal aspect of sin. So when you sin, you are guilty of you are worthy of death. That's what you've earned. The Bible tells us that the wages of sin are death. And so as a result, if you sin, the soul that sins shall die. That's what the Bible very clearly states. And so you deserve death. So the idea that you can outweigh the sins that you've done with good deeds is just not biblical. There's no evidence or reference in the Bible to suggest that if you're just good enough, you're going to outweigh the bad things that you've done because the wages of sin are death. You deserve to die. And so what happens is that in the scriptures, we are presented with this story from the Old Testament and the New Testament where God says, because your verdict is death, because that is what's supposed to happen when you sin, then I am going to step in as a substitution. Now, this is only true if you accept Jesus as substitution. Otherwise, then you stand before the judgment seat on your own merits, right? But if you accept the sacrifice of Jesus, and what you're saying is that you're accepting his substitution of you on his behalf. Now, why can he do that, right? In our legal system, this doesn't exist anymore. But in biblical times, if a person was facing a debt that they could not pay, then the next of kin, somebody that was considered their kinsman redeemer, right? They would step in and they would redeem this person. And that means that they would pay the debt of this person on their behalf. If the person had, because of debt, become a slave, the kinsman redeemer could come in and substitute for them and become a slave on their behalf, basically taking the penalty of the debt that they had incurred on their behalf instead of them taking the penalty, right? And so what we're seeing from biblical terms, and in our case for salvation, is Jesus saying, look, I'm the next of kin. That's why you constantly see in the Bible Jesus relating to us as a relative. And the reason for that is because he is the next of kin. And this is why he presents himself as a kinsman redeemer and not kingsman like King, but kin like Kin, like next of kin. And so he presents himself as a kinsman redeemer so that he can take the punishment that's supposed to be for us, so he can take it in our place and he could pay our debt. And so when we say that Jesus died on our behalf, what we're saying is that we had a debt, and that debt was a debt of sin, and that Jesus then takes that debt and says, he can't pay that. I'm going to pay for it instead. And he did. He paid for it on the cross. And his sacrifice stands as a paid in full stamp on your debt, on my debt. We see an illustration of this in the book of Genesis, chapter 22, where Abraham, Abraham is supposed to sacrifice his son. Abraham had a debt. He had made a covenant with God, he had failed his covenant with God, and now God had told him, hey, look, go sacrifice your son. Abraham doesn't step in and be like, he doesn't complain, he doesn't kick back. He knew he was guilty, right? As they're going up to the mountain, Abraham says something very interesting because despite the fact that Abraham knew that he was going to go sacrifice his son on the mountain as God had commanded him to do, he tells his son that God would provide for the sacrifice. And so Abraham understood this idea of substitution that we're talking about. There was an element of substitution already that was alive and well then, to the point where Abraham can react to it and plan for that to be the case, or at least hope for that to be the case. And which is why he says that to Isaac, to his son. Take a look at Genesis chapter 22, verse 8. It says, Isaac asks him, hey, we've got the wood, we're climbing up the mountain, we've got everything we need for the sacrifice. Where's the lamb? Where's the sheep? What are we going to sacrifice? And Abraham replies, verse 8, God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son. Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way, for I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham named that place Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use that name as a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Now, this text is saturated with biblical imagery that points to Jesus. And the reality is that that's really what the text is talking about, the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus would make on our behalf. Because although Abraham did not sacrifice his son, God did. And Jesus did die. Isaac did not. Isaac received the substitution. The reason why Isaac didn't have to die was because Jesus would die. And so the same thing is as happens for us, right? That's the point of this story, so that we understand substitution, that we understand that although we deserve to die, and I don't care how many good deeds you've done, it doesn't matter. They can't outweigh the debt of your sin. What outweighs the debt of your sin is the substitutionary sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So you're either hidden behind the lamb with Jesus Christ, or you're not, right? So the idea here that the Bible is offering is saying, look, you don't have to pay for the sacrifice yourself. You are a sinner. You are a sinner. You are guilty. But in Jesus, you can be saved, which means that you can accept his sacrifice on your behalf, so you don't have to pay for this debt on your own. So the invitation today is simply accept the sacrifice, accept the offer that God is extending to you and to me through his son, Jesus.